Chapter 3, How Step 1 is different from medical school. In this chapter, I'll explain how Step 1 differs fundamentally from the exams you've taken in medical school. Step 1 isn't just a test of knowledge, it's an application-based exam that requires you to think critically under pressure. This chapter explores the exam structure, time management challenges it presents, and how to adjust your study habits accordingly. You could expect a breakdown of Step 1's structure and how it differs from medical school exams, the shift from memorizing facts to applying clinical reasoning, and also strategies for managing your time effectively and approaching clinical vignettes. The transition from medical school to Step 1 is one of the most challenging parts of medical education. It's what they call dedicated preparation. It's not just the sheer volume of material that makes it hard. It's the way you're tested. Medical school exams focus on testing your knowledge of individual concepts, often in isolation, with clear questions and straightforward answers. Step 1, on the other hand, tests your ability to apply broad, interconnected knowledge to complex clinical scenarios. It's not just about what you know, it's about how you use what you know. And that's the kicker. The most jarring thing from my Step 1 experience was realizing just how different it was from an exam I had taken in medical school. It wasn't about regurgitating information. It was about pattern recognition, time management, and critical thinking, all under significant amount of pressure. You have the MCAT, you have medical school, and then Step 1 is a whole nother beast. And so the Step 1 structure of the exam is pretty straightforward, with some questionable things that you kind of have to get used to. You have 280 questions, you have 7 blocks, 40 questions per block, 60 minutes per block of 40 questions. There's 80 experimental questions, and a total time of 8 hours, with a 45-minute break that you can add to, because you have a tutorial that is 15 minutes, so you can have up to 60 minutes worth of a break. And typically you have about 90 seconds per question, and out of the 280 questions, minus the 80 experimental questions that are not scored, you have a total of 200 scored questions that you need to get at least 63 to 64% of right in order for you to pass STEP. Yeah. And so let's just sort of break down what that means for STEP and why it's so unique, right? So again, the number of questions, we have 280 broken down into 7 blocks of 40 questions. The blocks are timed, and you have about 60 minutes to complete each block, which averages about 90 seconds per question. I mentioned those experimental questions, which there's 80 of them on your exam, and those are not meant to be scored. The frustrating part is that you won't know which ones are experimental and which ones aren't. So you need to treat each question as if it counts. Even if it doesn't, you will never know. And the time pressure, you have about 8 hours to complete the exam, including a 45-minute break time. If you skip the tutorial at the beginning of the exam, you can add those extra 15 minutes to your break time, giving you 60 minutes, which is a lifesaver when you're trying to navigate the grueling day of the test. But you have to use your break sparingly, and you have to keep track of it all. If you don't, then you can run the risk of running out of break time, and whatever break you take cuts into your block time. And that sucks. Usually sneaks up on people at the end of the exam between blocks 6 and 7. Step 1 doesn't just test your ability to answer questions. It tests your stamina, your focus, your ability to stay calm under pressure. You're not just racing against the clock, you're managing mental fatigue and stress throughout the day as well. And so when you're preparing for Step 1, you want to prepare for this, the fatigue. You want to prepare for the stress. You want to prepare for all those things as you are also preparing your mental Rolodex for being able to pull stuff out. So it's a physical endeavor. Key differences between medical school and Step 1. In medical school, you're often tested on specific siloed pieces of information. Think, what is the mechanism of action of this drug, or what are the clinical features of these diseases? Pretty much straightforward questions for the most part. That can usually be answered if you're memorizing the material, right? Step one is different. The questions are clinical vignettes that present you with a patient scenario requiring you to analyze situations and figure out what's going on before even answering the question. The vignettes often include extraneous information, meaning you need to sift through it all to find what's actually relevant. And the question isn't simply what drug treats hypertension, but given this patient's complex presentation, what medication is the most appropriate, right? And so it's asking the same thing, just worded differently. And the best way that I like to describe it is, if you're used to speaking and talking a certain way and listening to certain things a certain way, the board exam wording is very much like trying to learn a second language for the most part, because you have to translate what they actually mean in the actual exam. This shift from direct recall to clinical reasoning is what makes step one so difficult. You're not just recalling facts, you're interpreting them and applying them to clinical scenarios. And so if the subjects in your mind are neatly organized in their own respective boxes, think about step one as just a hodgepodge of everything. Everything is fair game and everything is interconnected. So pattern recognition, the key to step one for the most part. One of the most important skills for step one is pattern recognition. The exam tests whether you can quickly identify what's going on with the patient and match that to the right diagnosis or treatment. You need to be able to recognize clinical patterns, so common presentations of diseases and conditions, diagnostic patterns, so the key diagnostic tests or labs associated with those specific conditions, and treatment patterns, the first line treatment for common conditions and mechanisms behind them. For the most part, you don't need to treat, but you need to know what will happen if somebody was treated with something. And so the way I could describe it is, there's all these situations that you can't choose, and you have to recognize what is the one that is actually accurate for the right answer. Step one is designed to see if you can identify these patterns quickly under pressure. And in the context of a complex patient scenario, if you can't recognize the pattern, you'll struggle to answer the questions in the 90 seconds that you're given. And that's when you get caught slipping. So the role of time management. Time management is another crucial difference between medical school and step one. In medical school, you might have time to think through each question slowly and carefully. Step one doesn't give you that luxury. With 90 seconds per question, you need to be efficient and strategic with your time, which means skimming unnecessary information, because not every detail in the question is relevant. So you need to learn how to identify what matters quickly. Also prioritizing certain questions. Some questions are designed to be answered in less than 90 seconds, while others may require more time. It's not designed that way, but it may take you more time. Knowing how to allocate your time effectively is key. If you finished one in 30 seconds, then that gives you a little bit more time for your other questions. That doesn't mean to take all that time, but at least you have it. How to shift your study approach. You want to train for the exam. Don't try to cram until your brain hurts. Build those mental muscles. So think about your brain as being on overload when you're trying to memorize, and think about you trying to buff out when you're learning how to apply the stuff. We want application, not memorization. To prepare for step one, you need to shift your focus from memorizing information to mastering the test-taking process. And here's how. Focus on application. Not just memorizing facts anymore. You're learning how to apply those facts in a clinical scenario. This means prioritizing practice questions over content review and spending more time reviewing UWorld and NBME practice questions than rereading textbooks. You want to think about things in the context of how you're actually being tested, not outside of that context. Mastering clinical reasoning. You need to learn how to think like a clinician, which means focusing on how to approach clinical cases, not just what is the right answer. You want to practice under time conditions. Get used to the time pressure of step one. You need to practice answering questions under time conditions. Doing 40 blocks with a timer will help you build the stamina and efficiency you need to get through the exam. You don't need to do 200 questions a day. You could be good with 80 to 100, but you need to know how to answer the questions in a timely manner when you're actually doing the questions. Your review process, whole different story. But you shouldn't be spending 7 hours doing 80 questions. No, it's unacceptable. So this is a dirty little secret about step one. And this is something that really took me some time to come to terms with, is that since 2020, the pass rate for step one has dropped. What that means is that every year you could expect more people to fail step one, essentially. And so to put it into practice and to put it into context, 2020, the pass rate was at 98%. Now it's probably below 90. And so one thing you'll notice about step one is if you look at the history of the exam post-pandemic, the exam has gotten exceedingly more difficult since 2020. The pass rate has dropped from 98% to below 90 in 3 years. And this is for first-time MD test takers, not including anybody else. And so yes, it has kind of gotten harder. And so people don't want to admit it, but they're kind of playing in our faces, to be honest with you. And often they're saying, oh, because it's pass fail, people aren't going to class, people aren't focused, you're sleeping too much, you're partying too much, playing too many video games, you're taking too many vacations, too much self-care, you're failing and it's your fault. But that's not the experience that everybody has. And for the most part, it's a traumatic experience. And I know a bunch of people that are still going through it right now, regardless of it being pass fail. And so since it's became pass fail, it has become exceedingly more challenging. And that's one thing to note. And they're not doing anything to improve it. So pay attention to that. Don't get caught slipping. Now let's just trim the fat. So listen up, future doctors. Step one isn't about flexing how much you've memorized. It's about showing how well you can apply what you know. So let's break this down. Application, not recall. Medical school exams ask you to regurgitate facts. Step one does not. It's all about applying the knowledge to clinical scenarios. So think critically. If you're just memorizing, you're playing the wrong game. Clinical vignettes are the main event. Every question is wrapped in a patient scenario, and they're not short. You need to decode symptoms, lab values, histories to get the right answer. It's all about pattern recognition. Spot the clues and connect the dots. 1 + 1 = 2. A + B = C. Time management is your secret weapon. You've got 90 seconds per question. Waste time and you're toast. Practicing staying focused and efficient so you can crush even the toughest questions under pressure. It's the name of the game. Stop memorizing, start solving. If you're glued to your textbook, you're studying wrong. Shift gears to practice questions. NBME, UWorld, self-assessments. They're pretty much your best friend at this point. Use questions to train your brain to think like the test makers. I know it sounds cliche, but as an athlete, I won my starting job on the field. I practice on the field, I play on the field. If you want to do well, you have to train in the conditions that you're going to be tested in. That's it. Step one is a problem-solving marathon. It's not about knowing every obscure enzyme or gene. It's about applying your knowledge, thinking critically, and managing your time like a boss. You're not expected to come up out of nowhere with this magical answer. The answer is right in front of you. Just pick the right one and recognize which ones are wrong. In Chapter 4, I'll show you exact strategies I used to bounce back after failing my first attempt. And this is where we get tactical, step-by-step techniques to break down questions, eliminate wrong answers, and boost your efficiency. So bottom line, forget the fluff. Step one is about thinking fast, problem solving, and playing the game smarter than the next person. And it's not a zero-sum game. Everybody can pass. And one person passing has no impact on you passing. So buckle up and let's get after it. Thanks for checking this out. This is USMLE Step 1000, created by me, Stephen Christian, a space where you can turn your Step 1 prep into something smarter, sustainable, and stress-free. If you found this helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. You can follow us on Spotify for more study tips and more audio podcast stuff. Instagram at USMLE Step 1000, and you can like the Facebook page to stay connected. Don't forget to download all the resources, all the Anki decks, the clinical clues, everything from the PDFs and everything that you saw in the videos you can find at www.step1000.com. And follow the blog for more updates as well at www.usmlestep1000.com, your one-stop shop for everything Step 1000. And if you like what I'm doing here and you want to follow or at least support, you can check me out on social media at Stuck on an Island. Thanks again, and I look forward to sharing more stuff about Step 1 prep and how to overcome these mental hurdles so that you can have the best possible experience possible. So again, I'm not going to hold you any longer, but remember, let's keep pushing forward, one step at a time, to 1000.